Hey everyone, theswiftscripter here, and welcome back to our Unity scripting series. So this is part 3 of the tutorial series, and in this video we're going to focus on player movement and input handling. We'll implement player movement using Unity's input system, handle various user inputs like keyboard and mouse, and create a camera that follows a player. So by the end of this video, you'll have like a solid player controller and understanding of that player controller for your game. So yeah, I recommend watching the previous video before we start. But anyways, let's get started. Now first, let's set up our player game object. So I'm kind of starting fresh because I created a separate project for the scripting series, because in the Unity tutorial series I have a separate level for that, so I'm just starting fresh here. So let's just create a new player project. We'll start by creating a capsule. So let's right click in the hierarchy, 3D object, then press capsule. This will be our player game object for now, so let's just rename it player, and we're also going to add a rigid body to this. Set the constraints under the rigid body for the rotation. Let's freeze it on all of its axes so that the player is prevented from tipping or falling over. Next, we'll also add a plane just to act as the placeholder for the ground. So I'll just add a plane right here, scale it up a bit. You can do whatever you want with this. I'm just doing this. Finally, we're gonna create an empty game object and call it the camera holder. So we're gonna make the main camera the child game object of the camera holder, and the way we do this is by dragging it under this empty game object. So firstly, let's zero it out, and we can view what we're seeing through the camera by doing this, dragging the game scene from here onto another separate tab. So if we do this, so we can adjust it so that it looks fine. So I'm just trying to make it look good for now, have a good angle. I'm also gonna actually add a new material for this ground so that it's easier to notice the capsule. So I'll just create a new material. So yeah, anyways, let's position this main camera in a way that makes sense. Let's see, so I'm just gonna move it down a little, right there. Let's rotate it a little bit, rotate this at least a little bit. Actually, let's zero out this entire thing firstly. Yeah, I guess something like this. And yeah, next we're gonna create a script to handle the player movement. So go to the scripts folder, just create one, right click, hover over create, then press folder and name it whatever you like. I created it already. Now let's create a new script, call it player controller, and don't forget to add this to the player game object because okay, wait, let's open it first actually. Okay, let's add it here to the player and open it once again. And now what we're gonna do, start writing the script. Firstly, I'm gonna create 3 variables, one of which is the public float move speed. And whenever you have float, don't forget to add an F at the end, and then a semicolon. This will obviously adjust what the speed of the player is. Next, I'm gonna add something called a turn speed, which is how fast the player can rotate the camera. Finally, I'll add a private rigid body, RB, and what this does is store the rigid body component attached to the players. And the way we do this is by doing RB, make sure it's in the start method, RB equals get component, and then the type we want is rigid body, and as you can see it autocompletes, so just press tab. So we're storing the rigid body attached to our player in the RB variable. Save this, and the next thing we'll do, but just don't forget to save every once in a while. Next thing we're gonna do is go to update now and make a new float. Call it move direction equals input.getAxis vertical. So I'm gonna explain this soon, what this input is. I've explained it in a previous video, but I'll do it again. And then we'll add a turn direction equals input.getAxis horizontal. And then we want to move the vector 3 forward or backward, right? So we're gonna create a vector, or we're gonna wanna move the player into 3D space. So let's do vector 3 move equals transform.forward, which is basically just moving it across the blue axis. So that's the Z axis. So it's 0, 0, and 1 as a vector 3. So really this is the same thing as vector 3 0, 0, and 1. That's pretty much what this is, but it's an easier way of putting this. Transform.forward, and then we want to multiply this by move direction. And basically what this does is if you move forward or backward using W or S keys, then it's gonna set a certain value on a range from -1 to 1 and multiply it by that value. So if it's -1, you're going backwards because you pressed S. And if you're going forward, you're pressing W, and that's a positive value. So that's why it multiplies it. Then multiply it by move speed, because we want to adjust how fast it moves. And never forget time.delta time when you're dealing with these rigid bodies. And the way I'm going to deal with it is actually do rb.movePosition plus move. So it's the direction we're moving plus that position, and we're adding it because we're moving the player to a new position from its original position. So we're really moving it from that position. Next, we're going to want to rotate the player when they press a certain key. So do float turn equals turn direction, which is if you press A or D, then it moves left or right, -1 or 1. So if you press A, then it's a negative value, -1, and D is a positive value, so +1. So we're multiplying it by that. And as you can see, it auto completes. So just press tab. And when we're dealing with rotations, we're always going to use something called a quaternion. And we're going to call this turn rotation equals quaternion.euler 0f, because we have floats as the arguments in here. Then we're having turn on the y-axis, rotate it across the y-axis. Finally, 0f for z-axis. So really what this does is rotates the rigid body across the y-axis. And to use the rigid body for this, do rb.rotation, and we're not going to add the turn rotation. We're actually going to multiply it. So turn rotation and then semicolon. So what this line does is creates a new rotation. And then the next line, what this does is rotates the player to the new rotation. So I'm going to save this. And since we have the player script now, we're going to add a camera follower script. So let's add a new script, call it camera follow. Open this. And we want to write a simple script that follows the player's position while maintaining a set offset. You can do public transform player, and we can just attach the player's transform to this later, but public vector 3 offset. And we'll set this in Unity itself. The offset, let's set this first. So equals transform dot position minus player position. And then transform, something we want to make sure we do is actually not use update, because in the we're going to actually use late update. And I'll tell you the reason why we do this. So we update the camera's position to follow the player, maintaining the offset distance. And late update is used to ensure that the camera follows the player after the other updates have been processed, which in this case is the player being moved to the new position. So we're going to do transform.position equals player.position plus offset. So this happens after the player moves. So save this, go back to Unity, and add the script to the camera holder. And here, let's drag the player transform and offset. Let's just set this. Okay, now let's just test it out. Let's see how it is. All right, it is definitely moving in the direction we want. As you can see from here, if you test it out, let's see. All right, yeah, that's pretty good. So now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, before we wrap up, we're gonna actually talk about Unity's input manager. So the input manager is where you can configure input settings for your game. So I'm just gonna show it to you right now. Go to Edit, Project Settings, and then click where it says Input Manager. Click on this arrow where it says axes, and all these things will pop up. Basically, by default, Unity maps common inputs such as the arrow keys and the WASD keys, and also mouse movement to access names like horizontal and vertical, C, A, or D. You can adjust this however you like. I don't want to adjust it because I like the way it is, but you can do whatever you see fit. It has lots of properties like name, gravity, dead, sensitivity, snap, things like that. And you can even add your own custom inputs by like increasing the size property of the axes array and configuring the new input settings. For example, you could create a new axis for jump mapped into the spacebar, so you don't have to set it to this. Instead, you can set it to something else. Yeah, you can do a lot of things. I don't usually mess around with this because I like the way it is right now, but that's pretty much it for this video. In this video, we covered how to set up a player movement and also input handling for Unity. We also created a player game object with a written script to handle that movement, as well as a camera follower. We also touched on the InputManager to understand how Unity handles input. So with these skills, you can, experiment with this, test it out, and you can create your own controllers for your game. So yeah, stay tuned for the next video where we'll dive into game mechanics and logic implementation. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, listening to me yap, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye!